by the military-industrial complex.
It could be seen to move violently forward, violently forward, violently forward.
I'm just a patsy.
Let's win there.
I have a dream.
I said this once or twice, but it bears repeating. If you like your current insurance, you will keep your current insurance.
You think about the Army and the Navy and the missions they run to protect the world, they run on SAP.
You have done a really spectacular job. I guess pretty much everybody at this table is your customer, so
Exactly.
That's not so bad.
Exactly.
I want to congratulate
Thank you, Mr. President. Thanks.
And we're back. Today we have Victoria Alexander joining us today. Victoria is an author. She's written a bunch of different kinds of books, a bunch of novels, and then you also specialize in language and how words are used and how that interfaces with science. Welcome, Victoria.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know how to introduce myself. It's really difficult. Should I start with the novelist thing, or should I end up with the philosopher of science?
You could,
and how are connected.
Whatever way you want to do it for people who don't know who you are. I've spent the last day kind of like deep diving on you, and to say that your scope is broad would be an understatement.
Yeah, I don't know what to focus on. My field is called biosemiotics, which scares people off a lot. And a related field is code biology. But is
that how biological elements send signals to each other? Is that how that works?
Yeah. Yes. So there isn't a theory of how that works. What is assigned to a biological entity? Mm-hmm. And I got into this field because I started out in the literary field, and I understand how new meanings are created by interpreting different sound patterns and coincidental patterns, and how things can symbolize, become encrypted. If you talk about code biology, what is a code? It literally is an encrypted pattern of some kind. Well, how did it get encrypted? What's the encryption rule? That's a weird thing to say about biology. You have to explain.
It is. I was telling my wife this morning that I thought that I was into biosemiotics when I was a fashion photographer. Because
maybe so, yeah.
Because I think that I think that when I first started to think critically in my adult life, I was standing in a photo studio and I was shooting pictures of a model, and I was looking into my camera. I had my head down and I was looking into my camera, and I was thinking to myself, what is it about when I push the button now that makes somebody who looks at this picture later want to buy a sweater, as opposed to pushing the button now, which may not make them buy the sweater, because you're juggling a bunch of different things, right? You're juggling the technique, the lighting and the camera and all of that. You're juggling the what I call the style, everything in front of the camera, and then when you're pushing the button, you're trying to give the whole thing context. So
there's a lot of rhetoric involved in those visual images, and I started to think like that. What are the meanings of all these patterns and the way they're arranged, and how do they make people do things? How do they make people think certain ways? When I first started as an undergraduate in Hunter College, I took a course with Stuart Ewing, who was interviewed in this Century of the Self, Adam Curtis's long documentary on Bernays. And so entering college, I just had this idea that interpreting that there's a conspiracy behind a lot of the advertising in politics. So, that was my first introduction to the kinds of thinking that you're supposed to do in college, and I just never stopped. And I was in literary theory, narrative theory, getting a PhD, and I became obsessed with the idea that how the author is dead, and the postmodern idea that there is no author anymore, that there's no intentionality behind a work of art, that it's all determined by your cultural background, determined by language, determined by your economic background. And so literary theorists became interested in reading a book to say, what are the underlying identity politics here? And no one was interested in style anymore. What makes a sentence a good one? And so that was sort of disappointing. And I wanted to say, when you're reading a sentence, if it's not completely transparent, like the instructions on, some tool or something like that, there are some sentences where you can feel the artist's intention. Because of that pattern, that they want you to feel this way about this word. And so I wanted to get at so that is what intentionality feels like in art. And then I decided that when you see things like that in nature, too, on the cover of my book, which is called The Biologist's Mistress, there's a picture of a tree, and there's a cloud. The tree is bare, it has no leaves. And there's a cloud behind the tree, and the cloud happens to be shaped like leaves would. And so you have this wonderful coincidence that looks like nature has a handyman behind it, like nature is a work of art. And so I started studying those kinds of things in biology and evolution, and I went to the Santa Fe Institute to study complex system science with one of the, there you go.
I wish I could blow it up bigger,
Yeah, you get the idea. This is a Ukrainian artist who did this. Lovely. His work all involves interesting intersections.
Right.
This is Photoshop though, but it does. He's got great ideas. But so basically, I started looking for those kinds of patterns in nature and biology, and if you have certain kinds of animal patterns that are coincidentally like something like that, or you have a molecule that's coincidentally like a receptor, what kind of effects does that lead to? And that is how I became a philosopher of biology.
Well, it's super interesting. I have completely backed into, I consider myself an amateur linguist, but the way that I started was by learning neurolinguistic programming. And I think that was an accident in a lot of ways, but I picked up this book by Neil Strauss called The Game. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's about pickup artists on Sunset Boulevard who are taking classes in neurolinguistic programming. And being able to pick up women on Sunset Boulevard is a good lab for hypnosis techniques, because you go in and you try your technique, and then if it doesn't work, you go back and you talk to your coach, and then you go back and do it again, right? And so there's a very practical component to it if you can get around the kind of lurid depravity that is motivating the people in the book. I mean, I think it's like a sociopath's book, but it led me down this path of neurolinguistic programming. And neurolinguistic programming is, as far as I'm concerned, it's a military program. And what it was designed to do was to categorize patterns of speech that human beings have been doing for thousands of years in a way that you can turn around and you can train people quickly in how to affect reframing people's belief systems conversationally in a very short period of time. And go ahead.
Yeah, I was listening to you talk. You were interviewing Noel Spangler, who's using comedic art to get a point across, and I feel sure that in the Neurolinguistic Handbook there, they probably utilize comedy in some way, because it is an interesting disarming technique, because it usually involves you're leading the person down a path, a logical path, and they're following you along, and then there's some sort of surprise.
Yes.
And once they're, in that moment of surprise, it sort of jogs their mental habits. And it frees them up for a moment.
Right, and Noel was saying that comedy makes people stop thinking, but what I think I said, I think I corrected what I thought he meant, which is that what people who learn neurolinguistic programming learn how to do is to listen for deletions, distortions, and generalizations. What Noam Chomsky said that we all have this kind of deep structure, right? And again, he didn't invent it. He just wrote about something that is kind of a universal. Richard Bandler and John Grinder came along and they said, well, if people have this deep structure of memory, in order to squeeze the ideas that they have into the number of words that are available for a sentence coming out of somebody's mouth, in order to transmit that message to the other person's ears that's listening, that you need to either delete, distort, or generalize that deep structure of language. And so, by virtue of the fact that we are constantly deleting, distorting, and generalizing our entire corpus of reality into the number of words that will fit out of our mouths, if you're trained to listen to people for their deletions, distortions, and generalizations, understanding that we're always doing it whenever we're speaking, then you can frame questions that will cause the person to go into a state of cognitive dissonance, and at that point they become suggestible, and you can make a suggestion. So my thesis was that comedy does that. So it doesn't actually stop people from thinking, but it does put them into a cognitive dissonance state.
I think Noel actually added, if I remember correctly, because my ears pricked up too when you were discussing that, and I thought to myself, it's not that they get them stop thinking, and then he added later, if I'm not mistaken, they stop thinking in their habitual way.
Correct.
They start going along their preconceived notions, and then they're ready to, you go through a little moment of irrationality or something like that, or cognitive dissonance, where you have a little skip and you have to find that new pattern to get to, and if you don't find that new pattern, you might have some anxiety or something. But then
right, and to put it into the same frame as what we were talking about, biological semiotics, it's like the receptor and what's the other part? The two things.
The ligand and the receptor, like a molecule and a receptor that fit
together. Well, they don't. They're supposed to fit together, but then they don't. Right? Then it causes a little confusion, right?
Or if it connects with something that's similar to what it normally connects to, and then that causes a slightly different reaction in the cell. And that almost all pharmaceutical interventions are based on some sort of mimicry molecule that kind of can lodge itself in the receptor and disable a certain reaction or slow it down. Most of pharmacy is interfering with the body, distorting the body's tendency to use signs. So
yeah, it's super interesting. So tell me a little bit about what your worldview is right now, because I find your background curious, and I say curious because if I had to make a list of well, let me just put it this way. I think that Carol Quigley or Anthony Sutton would describe you as somebody who has been completely involved with the Anglo-American establishment for your entire career. Because when I look at things like Rockefeller Foundation, Fulbright Scholar, United States State Department, there was a website that was mentioning you called Third Way. These are all giant kind of like Anglo-American establishment, alarms going off. And yet the things that you seem to be very concerned about are the things that, as far as I'm concerned, they're responsible for at the end of the day. So,
I honestly, I guess my work is so unique, and it's so interesting for the people who are reading those grant proposals that they keep giving them to me, and they don't vet me hard enough, I guess. I use an alias on my social media, so maybe they're not.
Well,
I don't know how. I have imposter syndrome sometimes that they haven't discovered that, or maybe some of the people reading those proposals don't care, and they really do. I'm careful the way I say things. I don't say things in a way that they sound kooky, and so maybe that's part of it. And also, when I wrote a dark comic novel about 9/11. There's a 9/11 widow who remarries, and her son Hamlet becomes depressed. So it's Hamlet revised as a 9/11 conspiracy theorist. And so I'm using a lot of comic elements
is that
to
it?
retell a story. That's actually, I said it in my town of Amenia, New York. Locus Aminus means a pleasant place. It's the pastoral paradise where nothing bad can ever happen until it does. And actually, the title of this came from a friend. Do you know who John Ashbery is?
I don't.
He's a very famous postmodern poet. So again, and he's in that world of totally left-leaning poetry world that I was part of, and his husband. Oh my God, now I'm forgetting his name. I just had it a minute ago. Anyway, his husband. I had just moved to Amenia from Soho, New York, and his husband, we were at dinner, and he said to me, Amenia, locus aminus, where nothing bad can ever happen until it does. And I just bought a farm here, a sheep farm, and so that kind of stuck with me. And so I always had that in the back of my mind, as writing a kind of dark comic pastoral set in the country. I retreated from the city after 9/11, worried, because I saw what happened there. I was within the zone that you had to have ID to get in, and the military was standing around with guns. I was not there on 9/11. I was in New Mexico at the Santa Fe Institute on a fellowship, and I couldn't get home for 10 days. But so to get back to what I was saying about comedy, so here I was, an academic, liberal, and it was weird because none of my friends were interested in anti-war topic of 9/11, that maybe the government knew the planes were coming, and
or they were flying them,
and some explosives were implanted in the because buildings don't fall down like that,
right?
But none of my friends would talk to me. Like, I'd bring it up and oh, did you hear about and none of them would talk to me about it. And so I knew I had to find a way to get into their world, which is by entering their world through a classic like Hamlet. And
that makes sense, because I think that again, people have cognitive dissonance. I've done a lot of research on people who have suffered through ritual trauma, trauma-based mind control. People like Kathy O'Brien and Bryce Taylor and Annette Annette Lucas and what's the other name? There's a whole section on the book section of my Duke report about these survivors who have written these things, and there's a therapist named Allison Miller, and the title of her handbook, which is designed for other therapists, is called Healing the Unimaginable.
You need to turn the mic up.
I can't turn the mic up.
Okay.
Okay, I can't turn the mic up. So people are just gonna have to. I can change my mic settings here. I've got it set to the maximum amount. I've got news. Okay, automatically. I can hit automatically adjust mic volume. Does that make it better?
It makes it lower.
Makes it lower. That's what I thought. So I'm going to turn it back up. It's up all the way. So I probably have background noise, and I could go close a window.
I could also try putting on a headset if that makes it better.
It's probably for me. Okay. Okay. So Jerry says my mic is fine on YouTube. So Mike Panzer, you're going to have to struggle. Anyway.
Thank you, Jerry.
Anyway, where was I? Healing the unimaginable. What Allison Miller says in that book is that most people who go through this kinds of trauma can't even find a therapist because their therapists don't understand the scope of the trauma. They haven't been trained that they're actually parents who are parts of cults who learn how to ritually abuse their children into turning them into these kind of MK Ultra mind slaves. They don't believe that those things really exist.
We cannot imagine that. We cannot imagine that a parent would do that. It's just beyond it. That is the problem, I guess. The problem is most people are not monsters. And so we simply cannot imagine that anybody would do anything like that. So it's very, very hard for those people to convince anyone that happened, or that the government is willing to kill its own people, kill millions of people, hundreds of thousands of people at least. But this has happened throughout history.
In my research, we're up to about 500 million at this point.
Yeah. I was just thinking about the recent genocide, the one yesterday.
Yeah.
You see the way I nervously laugh whenever I talk about the number of dead. It's something that happens to you.
No, it's a scope thing, right? So it's interesting because I'm listening to your story and I'm living your story right now. So I lived in locus. How do you say the second word?
Aminus.
Locus Aminus. I lived in the Pacific Palisades, which is the locus Aminus of the world. Okay, I mean, my wife came to see me the first time that she met me, and there were two kids riding their bikes down the middle of the street, who are 8 or 9 years old. And she goes, "Kids still ride their bikes down the middle of the street here?" And I said, "Yeah." And there was a farmer's market that we could walk to, and there was a village, and they had a 4th of July parade every year, and the last vehicles at the end of the 4th of July parade were always the fire trucks, and everybody, waved American flags and loved the firemen. And on January 7th of this year, the firemen didn't come. They didn't come, and 2,800 residences burned down in a day. Yeah. And it's the wealthiest real estate in California. And it's just erased. So we're in Santa Monica right now. This is a furnished studio apartment where we've been sheltering, and we just signed a lease on a little place by the beach in Oxnard, but we're doing the same thing as you. It's not a sheep farm. My wife would prefer a sheep farm, I'm sure. But we're the second best thing is a beach shack. So we're going to move up 100 miles north of here and get out of what I think is. I mean, people are. My thesis is that it's a World Economic Forum, Rothschild, Getty Oil move. There's hundreds of millions of barrels of oil under the Palisades to add on top of the fact that it's the pristine real estate. So there's all kinds of, agendas going on. I think they call it goal stacking. But yeah, I mean, I just feel like it's not safe here right now. It's not like there's Waymo, like every third car going by me by this window is a Waymo. Do you know what Waymos are?
No.
They're autonomous Ubers.
Oh, okay.
Okay, they're driverless cars. So
Really?
you go,
It's that widespread. I didn't realize.
yeah, I think they have them in a lot of cities. But in Santa Monica, Rand is here. So it's the and if you look at Rand in Google Maps, it's interesting because it's the Eye of Horus. So.
So a lot of the things that you've been mentioning too, I wanted to say you were talking about the Twin Towers in the 9/11 written as Roman numerals, right?
Yeah.
It's a mirror image, and the inspiration. I'm going to backtrack, but I'm going to come back to that. Okay, a little bit. The inspiration for my Horatio character in that novel, who comes to see the young Hamlet with the dust sample from 9/11 that he collected, and which is now being used by the scientists to find nanothermite in it and the iron microspheres and so forth. The evidence that there was definitely incendiaries used. The inspiration for that character was a guy named Tom Breidenbach, who's a poet. I met him through John Ashbery. Coincidentally, John Ashbery's name just came up again. But he was a poet, and he found, a friend of his found the collected the dust samples, gave them to Tom. Tom saved them, and then later was one of 4 samples that he gave to Stephen Jones. So when I was reading the nanothermite paper, I was reading along, and there was Tom Breidenbach's name that popped up. This is when I was first being introduced to this whole idea that anything happened on 9/11. And so it's very weird when someone you know appears in a scientific paper. It's this poet that I know. And so we get together and we're talking, and he's working on a...
Is this him? Is it?
It may be. That's too small for me to
yeah, the bio. Let me see if I can blow this up. Here we go.
He ended up publishing a book of poetry. Yes, that's Tom. Okay. Called. I haven't read this.
He has a Substack with 1 post.
Okay.
Okay. So. I'll just.
Okay. So I don't know his take on COVID, but he did publish a book of poems called 9/11. It was a 2-part book, but initially he was writing a nonfiction book about the whole history of using twins and scapegoats and that whole symbolism of using twins in sort of ritual murder and so forth. And he sent me the manuscript, and I read it and commented on it and was sending it back and forth. And he worked on it for years, but I don't think he ever published it. Probably too many things intervened in life. I know he was teaching at a university in New York, and it may have been very difficult for him to function. He's also gay, but not interested at all in the identity politics. When analyzing poetry, he wanted to study the style, talk about how words have effects. He doesn't want to talk about his personal sex life as a literary scholar. Hey. So I just, a lot of the things that you were saying, Tom Breidenbach had been writing about in this early manuscript.
Well, yeah, the scapegoat thing circles back. There's a book that I read called Henry Wentworth Monk. Henry Wentworth Monk was a British Anglican evangelist who met with Abraham Lincoln in 1864 to advocate for Jerusalem being a Jewish homeland. I I don't know how far back with the history of Zionism that you've gone, but it basically started at Oxford and Cambridge.
You've just given me the oldest reference that I know of. Although I read a book, when was that book published? It was called The Fixer, about a Jewish man in Odessa, and they were talking about Zionism there.
Well, the reason I bring it up is because he was friends with a guy named Holman Hunt, who was a pre-Raphaelite painter. He was put together by Monk and Holman were put together by John Ruskin, and John Ruskin was the mentor of Cecil Rhodes and Arthur Milner, or Albert.
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
It's disappointing when you find Ruskin was a very interesting art critic and very interested in how meaning is achieved through art and how feelings are achieved through art. So I suppose
anyway, I'm sorry. One of the other things, I don't know what the best way to broach this is too, but one of the things that I was noticing when I was reading your stuff, and I was trying to look at your background and then try to intuit out your motivation for doing things. Because I think that you're very open in the videos that I watched of you and in your work about what animates your work. Like you're pretty open about why you wanted to do this. You just told the story about your friend and the sample, and then you wound up writing a whole book about it, right? So there's obviously something going on there, and that is because you seem to be the type of personality, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, where you're constantly trying to make sense of things. Somebody once said there's two kinds of people in the world. I think it was he taught at New York University, Clay Shirky. And again, I don't like dichotomies that much. I find most of them to be false. But Clay Shirky said in this lecture, he said there's two kinds of people in the world. There's people who think the world makes sense, and there's people who are trying to make sense of the world. And so you very much remind me of this. I think I'm somebody who's always constantly trying to make sense of the world. And one of the things that I learned when I started I'll tell you the story about Matteo Morelli. I was learning how neurolinguistic programming, and Morelli said to me, he said, "Do you want to be a therapist?" And I said, "No, I don't want to be a therapist. I don't care about therapy." And he said, "Well, do you want to do self-help? Are you trying to quit smoking or lose weight?" And I said, "No, I don't want to do that either." And he said, "Well, why do you want to learn hypnosis?" And I said, "Well, I want to learn how it's been weaponized by politics and media and used against me." And he said, "Well, that's very simple." And I said, "What do you mean it's very simple?" And he goes, they only use one pattern. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, there's only one linguistic pattern that politicians and media use in order to control people. And if you understand that pattern, then it all becomes very self-evident. And I said, what's the pattern? Oh, master, what's the pattern? And the pattern is called the cause-effect complex equivalency. So if then equals because, or if X, then Y because Z. And I read one of your Substack posts about Yuval Harari. Okay, and everything he writes. Okay, and I don't like using universal quantifiers either. So let me qualify myself and say almost everything he writes is a cause-effect complex equivalency. And one of the things that's kind of a superpower about linguistics, and I was noticing that the name of one of your websites is what's the word for finger in
dactyl.
in Latin?
Yeah, dactyl. Dactyl Foundation. I'm a director of the Arts
your
Foundation.
Audio. Okay, I don't hear your audio.
Do
you hear my audio?
Test.
Do people hear my audio?
Yes. Test.
Who's complaining?
No one.
No one is. I can't hear her.
I can't either.
Okay, so
Hello,
Victoria,
hello.
we can't hear you. I'm going to
Okay.
take you out and put you back in. Here we go. Remove. Add.
Hello.
Oh, now I can hear you. And this is
echoing.
this is probably my computer. All right, here we go. I think I can hear you, and we're back. No, I think I can hear you.
How's that?
It's good.
Echo.
Okay, hang on. I'll fix the echo.
Can I
I'm
try
gonna
to?
I'm going to be back in my studio, people. Here we go. What happened was the settings randomly switched on my computer.
Hello.
I can hear you, and we can
I
all
can
hear
hear
you.
you. No, okay, I'm ready to put these in.
No, but it's good. It's good. It's good.
Okay.
It was a setting that changed on my computer, and this has happened ever since the fire. I wind up doing these shows, and I get into it, and then all of a sudden it changes. So what was I talking about? I was talking about the cause-effect complex equivalency.
Yeah.
Okay. And what I've noticed in a lot of your work is that the thing about the cause-effect complex equivalency is that if you can look at the linguistic form of it, okay, it tells you something about the veracity of the content. And there's another neurolinguistic programming guy named Robert Dilts. And Robert Dilts wrote a book 25 years ago called Sleight of Mouth. And 2 years ago, he updated it, and it's called Sleight of Mouth 2. But what Robert Dilts figured out was that if you can spot the cause-effect complex equivalency, there are at least 14 different ways to reframe the idea. So if
it's
you
just
go
in a different order because of this then the if then. So it's if then because of that.
Yes.
If then X
If
Y.
If this happens, then that happens because of this. Okay.
And does that have anything to do with the reaction, with the problem reaction solution too type of? Is that related? That's a common tool.
All right. So here's so just to give you like a little, I'll just give you a short history of my figuring this stuff out. So I figured out the problem. So Matteo Morelli, I give him full credit. He said, "Oh yeah, it's all cause-effect complex equivalency." Boom, done. And it took me about 3 days of my head spinning and just seeing it everywhere, because once you can spot it, then a lot of like talking heads on television simply become unlistenable because that's all they're doing. That's because it's literally all they're doing.
Right.
So that led me down the road of what I call epistemological warfare, which is we frame our reality based on how we learn whatever it is that we learn. And the battleground isn't what we learn. The battleground is how we actually came to the point where we learned what we learned. Okay. And then I was reading the Sermon on the Mount with my wife one morning. And instead of reading the Bible the way that I would normally read the Bible, which was trying to go into the meaning of each sentence, I started looking at the linguistic patterns the same way that, what was the name of your finger?
Dactyl?
Dactyl. The same way that you explain in your dactyls, okay? I'm looking at the linguistic technique that Jesus of Nazareth is using in every conversation that he has.
King James?
I actually start with the Greek. One of the great things about I start with my wife reads the Vulgate, which is in Latin. But what I've discovered, I started, Michael Jones is a guy who wrote this book called Logos Rising, where he he spends a whole book pointing out the fact that the word logos does not translate into the English word word. It translates into everything that can be done with a word, or the application of words in order to discern truth. And so that fundamentally changes things like John 1:1, where in the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos is God, has a completely different context if you understand what the word Logos means. And so the sermon, if you understand the epistemological warfare component of how it is that we learn things, and that the age-old method of controlling people's belief systems using rhetoric follows this cause-effect complex equivalency form, then the lessons, the linguistic lessons of the Sermon on the Mount wind up becoming the defense mechanisms for restarting critical thinking by applying the linguistic sense. For example, the word meek in the King James or in the Vulgate, whatever, in English, meek were thought of, be beholding, be...
Or subservient to the authority.
Be subservient. But in the Greek, it means listen thoughtfully, keep your sword in the sheath, okay? Okay, it doesn't mean do this. It means do this.
Yes, which is what some leaders found useful with Christianity, is that it taught people to be subservient to authority through perhaps the misinterpretation of the original intention. The way. Well,
when it was transferred into Latin, certainly. Okay, but. And that's why, some people say that that English and Latin and the Romance languages are slave languages, because we don't have the full scope of the words that are available in Greek. So your question was, I'm trying to loop this back to your question.
Whether or not this if-then, because it relates to the problem solution, the problem reaction solution scenario.
Yes.
If this, then that, and because the solution is we've identified the problem, and then if we get rid of this.
Okay, so let me tie them together.
Okay.
So Joseph Campbell said in this interview that he had with Bill Moyers in The Power of Myth, it was kind of a throwaway line, but he was talking about how death, resurrection, rebirth is an internal process of ideation. That is, that when we change our mind, then our belief dies and is resurrected and reborn as a new belief. And in that way, the passion of the Christ winds up becoming this internal process where you're putting your belief system on the cross of logos and crisis, of logos and discernment. Crisis in Greek is discernment. Okay, and then your old belief dies and is resurrected and reborn as a new belief. Okay, putting you in, and if you're doing that with love, then it's putting you closer to God or the truth or to natural law. That is, you're moving your belief system. And so
I could make that. I could make an analogy to what I talk about in biology too, with how adaptations are possible. And it's not just that you have a random mutation and then there's a lot of trial and error and something gets selected. New adaptations always occur when a organism is in its environment using its old belief, its old habit, its old purposeful behavior, which is a kind of behavioral tool that it has used previously.
Normalcy bias?
And
the
for
normalcy
whatever
bias?
Yeah, and for whatever reason, it's in a new environment, conditions have changed, and its old tool doesn't work as expected. Maybe it coincidentally fits with something else and works in a new way, so that organism gets to survive. And so that old habit of acting, that old purpose that it was using dies, and a new one is reborn. And you can only have new adaptations by repurposing old tools in your toolkit. And the extent to which you can be creative in the world is the degree to which you have a lot of experience. So you have a lot of different tools that you can use in different ways and try out different things and make productive mistakes. And I think most artists have gone through that, where they are trying to find the end of a poem or a theme to conclude the story or whatever, and then something happens in their life that's totally coincidental, and they go, aha, that's perfect, and it fits into the story, and everything falls into place, and it kind of crystallizes in this beautiful work of art. And that makes it feel very intentional, because it seems like you were pursuing that end the entire time.
Well, I might argue that you were, but
I've come to say, as a theory of intentionality, that is what intentionality is when you productively make a mistake that ends up being useful, and it rearranges your mind and you grow a little bit. Because
right.
otherwise,
wasn't there a Roman who said that what was it? Coincidences when opportunity meets preparedness, or
yes, there's a lot of quotes like that. Stravinsky has a good one. James Joyce has a good one. But basically, there's no such thing.
That is a cause-effect complex equivalency, by the way.
Okay.
What I just said. Okay. I'm just saying that we use them all the time. If we needed to prove everything that we were saying all the time, it would take too long to have conversations.
So let me ask you then, the complex equivalency, why is it so effective? Because it sets up a problem and then solves it in a single stroke and doesn't give the person a time to think about what is the problem. Is that what it is?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you may know that I did a little bit of work with a hypnotist, and I looked into trying to ask the question of how would hypnosis work? Can I use biosemiotics to explain how it might work? And so I worked with a hypnotist who turns out is my sister. She was telling me the kind of work that she was doing. She has a little practice called the Flow Center in Dallas, Texas. And as she was talking about what she did in therapy with people when they were under hypnosis, it sounded very similar to the kinds of reassociations of signs that happen in biology. And maybe there isn't a very good scientific explanation for why hypnosis could work. And so we went away together to somewhere in Pennsylvania and spent the whole weekend talking and working on a paper and sketched out our ideas. And it was really a fruitful experience for me hearing about that, and then applying biosemiotics to try to explain the mechanisms. And we wrote a paper called, I can't remember what it was called, but it's, if you look for hypnosis and Valerie Grimes and Victoria or V.N. Alexander, you can find it. Okay. No, I can never remember.
Who Grimes?
Valerie Grimes.
Okay.
And so one of the things that we talked about that fits the idea of in semiotics is you can associate one thing with another by means of a physical similarity. So if Trump looks like who's the Italian fascist leader? There's that one famous picture, Mussolini. There's one picture where they're putting up their chins in the same way, So you can get people to subconsciously. People are processing that imagery all the time, even if their logical minds would reject that kind of thing. that likeness goes into their subconscious. And all our biological cells process information, especially the neurons, due to some sort of likenesses because of, molecular mimicry, and the shapes of things bond with each other due to similarities and likeness. And that's a important component of biological signaling, is likeness. And another thing is if something just happens to be nearby, and you get that with something like Pavlovian conditioning. If the bell goes off when you're fed, you salivate, which is a very strange thing, because how does the brain connect an arbitrary symbol? The ringing of the bell is a symbol. It's arbitrary, but it's in the same context, just by proximity. And so that's almost a miracle. And so how does it happen? And people, dogs have brains, and they're able to, only animals with brains can make up symbols like that and learn symbols. But there are scientists who did the experiment with slime mold, and also with pea plants. And I wrote a paper on that too. Wish I could something. I can't remember any of my papers.
You can send me links later, and we can put them in the show notes.
That one is something like irrational aneural irrational creativity. Those are the keywords in that, and you can find it with my name. But so I look at how do organisms like slime mold, how are they trained with Pavlovian conditioning? And so this, if you study these really simple organisms, which all cells are very similar to neurons in that they communicate with chemical signals through little gap junctions, and they form networks. And the chemicals sort of wash over the cell networks like in waves, and the shape of those waves tend to coordinate the behavior of the cells. And so I look at things like that. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, you found it. So not only do human brains get fooled by things and can be manipulated by mere association because of due to likenesses or things happening coincidentally in time and place, but even slime mold. It's the nature of living systems, how living systems process information. It's totally unlike the model that is currently being used to create artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
To some extent, neurons do fire together to wire together, but a lot of the wiring is not statistical, like what happens most gets locked in. It's often what happens is salient in a way, it has a quality that the organism can sense, a likeness and a proximity. So computers don't sense anything like that. They're totally abstract symbols, just ones.
They don't have logos.
They don't have logos. Now that you've informed that word for me more, yes.
Yeah. They don't have it.
They don't have a theory
crisis.
of symbiosis. A what?
Yeah. Crisis, discernment. They don't have logos and discernment, which are the things that make us human.
Yes. I mean, people who argue that computers really are intelligent have a view of the human mind as being like a computer, because that's the analogy that people use. I mean, it used to, when clocks were first invented, then the human body was described as a clock, because that's right. But you can't understand a complex system better by comparing it to something much less complex.
Right. And you may, I don't want to lose the thread that we were on about cause-effect complex equivalency, and because I want to finish that thread, but I want to go sidebar here for a second and just let you know, I had lunch with a friend of mine a year ago who was talking to me about how he had just filed some patents that were based on the idea that that neurons act in the same are very like quantum computers in that they're yeah, and you're yes, and my sense when the words were coming out of his mouth are mimicking your head shake that you just did right now. So I thought the same thing, but it occurred to me at that point, and again, I don't know if you'll agree with me or not on this, but that comparing a neuron to a quantum computer is like comparing an Ethernet port to the internet. That is, I'm not sure what happens at the neuron level. I'm not sure that we've figured out what happens at the neuron level at this point, which I think is in line with what I just heard you say, I think. But to assume that a neuron is a quantum computer is this very materialist kind of way of looking at the world, where you're not making any kind of affordance for the idea that there might be something that we don't know about, that we haven't been able to figure out how to measure yet, or we'll never be able to measure.
Cannot be measured because
that cannot
it's
be measured
quality rather than a quantity.
Yes. Okay. Right.
So when I was at the Santa Fe Institute, my job there was to try to understand the intentionality, whether or not something, humans have free will, et cetera, et cetera. Free will is a bad term for it. Call it agency. Do human beings have the ability to make decisions on their own, despite what Noah Yuval Harari says?
Right.
And so we were, I was studying with a guy, one of the original investigators to chaos theory and complex system science, and Murray Gell-Mann, the guy who came up with the word quark for quantum mechanics, was there at the time. And so does it make any sense? Okay, you don't have agency if you're completely determined by physical material reality, right? At the beginning of the universe, one thing led to another. There you are. Everything you just did and said is determined by atoms hitting each other and so forth. So, okay, we reject that, but now do we put it in the place that we have quantum indeterminacy, so there's a total randomness. Therefore, we're free and we make our own decisions? That is... the agency has to come from within the living system itself, and that's what happened with complex system science and chaos theory. It's the way that the individual, certain habits and certain biases and certain subjectivity that the individual has developed through lifetime can then take indeterminate events that can be interpreted one way or another and make sense of it in a new way, which starts a new causal chain and a new causal reality that wasn't possible without that living system interpreting it in that way. And so Murray Gell-Mann, is he passed away? I'm not sure. I don't want to misquote him, but I remember him saying, and this is somebody who's, understands quantum mechanics and was there working on the issue of agency, and thought it was ridiculous to argue that indeterminacy or radical randomness would lead to some sort of free will or agency in an organism. So
yeah, Einstein said God doesn't throw dice, right?
Einstein said that, yeah.
I think he was talking to Erdős and Régnier when he said that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But there are interesting things about combinations of dice, because sevens are a lot more probable than other combinations, and there are certain inherent order in what appears to be chance events.
I named my daughter Seven for that reason. So.
Lovely. It's a pretty word.
Yeah. Indeed. Well, let me just finish with the. There's two things that I want to make, and then I want to get your reaction to them. So the problem reaction. I'm sorry. The death, resurrection, rebirth applied on the cross of logos and crisis moves you closer to truth. That's my interpretation. That's an internal process that takes place inside all of us. It's unique to us. The inverse, the external process, is problem, reaction, solution. Okay.
I can see that.
Which is to create the same psychological effect on people who are involved in the 9/11 attack or the Palisades fire, and then they react, and then they accept whatever the solution is, the Patriot Act or whatever the new Palisades is going to be. These are external, and what's interesting is that what I've noticed in I started to notice the Freemasons have this. The 33rd degree of Freemasonry has this slogan, "Ordo ab chaos," order out of chaos. And you're talking about chaos theory. And the first page of Edward Bernay's book on propaganda is called, the title chapter is Organizing Chaos. And so, or whether or not you call it ordo ab chaos or problem, reaction, solution, or the Hegelian dialectic, and oh yeah, by the way, Hegel never said it, okay? It was an interpretation of Hegel by Fichte, okay? And then it became the Hegelian dialectic. So if you asked Hegel what the Hegelian dialectic is, he probably wouldn't know what you're talking about. But it's all order out of chaos. And so when you start to look at things like the word chaos, like chaos theory, or Mel Brooks' Get Smart, The Secret Agent, his nemesis organization was called Chaos, right? So it's all, it's all, and Michael Hoffman would call that a hoodwink when they're using these numbers or these symbols. Anyway, so that's point number one. Point number two is that one of the things that I started to realize just recently, because I keep looking, the symbol of the Illuminati is a dot with a circle around it, or as the Germans would call it, a Circumpunkt, right? Which is the symbol that you make if you take a compass and you draw a circle. Okay. And one of the things that I've been working with the last couple of years is the idea that I think that in the epistemological war, in the epistemological battle space, let's call it, that the word for liberty, the word liberty and the word freedom wind up becoming a tug of war. Like there's a battle for meaning over those two words.
I heard you talk about that, and I wondered because in English, our French words came from the aristocracy, and the German words were spoken among the peasants or at the time. So our word for beef is French. If we cook with it, it's the French word. If it's a cow if it's an animal walking around, it's the German word. So when you have two words for two different things, one came from the aristocracy and one came from the German part. And so liberty would come from, and that would make sense with what you're saying. It comes from the rulers, but freedom comes from what the word for freedom that the peasants would have used.
Right. Well, I found this book. I think that Oxford and Cambridge are the Pentagon of epistemological warfare. So I found this book. It's published by an Oxford scholar called the Politics of the Greek Word for Freedom. And the Greeks basically had two words: freedom, eleutheria, and autonomia, which meant self-rule, right? And when the Romans came in, the Romans said, no, we're not going to use those words anymore. We're going to use this Roman word, liberty. And liberty is freedom that is granted to you by the Roman Empire. That is
because they're legislators.
Well, yeah, and that's where the fasci come in, because the fasci indicate the boundaries of liberty. That is, you can have this much freedom in the middle, but if you get outside the edges, then the fasci are actually it's a bundle of riot batons with an axe. So the riot batons get handed out to the riot police to keep the mob down. And then if that doesn't work, then they start lopping heads off. That's where the axe comes in. So the fasci actually are the boundaries of liberty. And so liberty implicit in the word is that it is limited and it is granted to you by someone who has got authority over you. And there's a confusion because you could do this experiment today. The next time you're sitting at the table with a couple of people, ask them whether or not they know the difference between the word liberty and the word freedom, because 9 times out of 10, there's no one in the room who knows the difference.
I hadn't thought of it before.
I didn't, again, it's only something that's come to my mind in the last 4 or 5 years, but I've spent a lot of time researching it at this point. And so I'm going to bring it back to the circumpunct, because a lot of if you look at whether or not it's postmodernism or the problems that you have in dealing with different disciplines of science working with each other, these all seem to be battles over boundary conditions.
Yes.
And if you understand, especially. Yeah, and so if you think about the dot with the circle around it being the creation of a boundary condition, then the dot represents the people who are operating within the boundary condition, right? And so the power to control our government, the power to control our society, the power to control people is the battle over what the perception of the boundary condition is for your life. So whether or not you're talking about CBDCs or social credit scores or any of those things, these are all technical constraints for enforcing boundary conditions. And the conversation that nobody ever seems to have, and I just watched a video that I made 6 months ago and I realized that I've left it out. I created this video that shows the difference between how liberty constrains culture. But what I didn't put in the video, and I could probably play it, what I didn't put in the video is who's the hand, and I illustrated liberty as being a pair of calipers. And if you move the calipers tighter, then you have less freedom. And if you move the calipers out, you have more freedom. But what I didn't put into the video is who's holding the calipers. You know what I mean? Like, and there is a bit of a bait and switch that goes on in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, because the Bill of Rights says that our rights come from the laws of nature and nature's God, which is the thing that differentiates the United States from all other, experiments in government.
Yeah, they're not given. They're not bestowed by the Constitution. They precede the Constitution, and the Constitution just acknowledges.
Yeah, but they're not in the Constitution. The rights that are
the rights that are enumerated had to be added later, because I don't know. I mean, maybe it seemed like, oh my God, we got to spell it out, or they'll start taking them away.
Well, that's what Patrick Henry said. That's why there is a Bill of Rights.
But as soon as you enumerate some rights and you forget, well, there also it says, and whatever else.
That's the catch-all amendment. It's the 10th Amendment.
Yeah, the catch-all amendment. But obviously, they didn't think to say that we had bodily autonomy, because that seems so obvious. They shouldn't need to put it in. But people are talking about, well, maybe we need to put it in now after the COVID.
Yeah, we probably do. Again, but these are all 10th Amendment rights. But again, we're talking about boundary conditions, right? My body is the boundary condition is my skin. Like you're not allowed in there.
What you were saying earlier about the external and the internal. So maybe this is the boundary conditions are kind of like the external supposition of the if then X because Y, and the internal is the crisis and resolution situation that you have. For me, when that was resonating with me a little bit, and I think of that as semiosis, which is a habitual sign action law that has become part of the automatic way that you think all the time. And poiesis is coming up with a new configuration of an idea, and the two are always working together all the time. Poiesis leads to new semiosis, and then the poiesis has to overturn the old semiosis and form a new law. And there's constant creation and decreation all the time.
Poiesis.
Creation, poetry.
That's like Aristotle's beat of drama. Poiesis, praxis, theoria.
I don't.
Actually, it's praxis, poiesis, theoria. Do you know that?
I'm not familiar with those three, so I'm not imagining how they're spelled. But poiesis is like autopoiesis, means self-creating.
Right.
And so it's,
Aristotle said that there's a beat to drama, which is, I think it was praxis, poiesis, theoria, which something happens, which makes somebody say something, which makes somebody think something, which makes something happen, which makes somebody say something, which makes somebody think something, which makes something happen, blah, 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 blah.
So the praxis is somebody says something, and then poiesis is somebody says something?
Well, something happens.
Uh-huh.
And I think it was Star Trek 7, the Undiscovered Country, and I was sitting in the movie theater by myself because I wanted to go see it, and I couldn't find anybody to go with me because I was a nerd. And the opening shot is Vulcan planet Praxis, and I'm sitting there, and then the planet explodes, and I laughed. I laughed out loud. I thought it was hilarious because I thought, well, the writer knows Aristotle. So anyway, I think we got a question from Arthur in Wales, who's one of the smartest people who follows me. Arthur said, are there cultural counterparts to dynamic biological systems? I think that's what she and I are trying to figure out. If culture was once seen as
Epiphenomenal
of biology, does it now increasingly influence biological development? I'm going to let you answer that question.
Culture is not an epiphenomenon. It's an emergent property of biology. So epiphenomenon is like for instance, the noise your engine makes is irrelevant to the running of your engine, just the roar of your engine. But now we think of these emergent properties that come from biology that seem to, I think maybe you mentioned, when you mentioned Chomsky's
deep structure,
deep structure, that's probably an emergent phenomenon that is a kind of tendency that's likely to emerge with all language speakers because of certain reasons, because of certain constraints. And so our cultures that emerge from our biology are determined by our biology and also in part determined by our various interpretations of the world as we move through it. Like I was saying, we're not completely determined by material reality, and neither are we completely, random. So then the question, so that's the setup. Does it now increasingly influence biological development? I belong to a group of biologists who are called the third way of evolution. And we take this and we work on, the physical evidence that what an organism does and thinks and the decisions that it makes can have an effect on its evolutionary trajectory. So the answer is yes. I could have just said yes. But there's the third way of biology. Dennis Noble is the main practitioner, founder of that group. Look that up if you're interested in hearing more about how organisms in the world have real agency, even affecting evolutionary trajectories. And certainly, things in modern culture are affecting reproduction, fertility, and so forth, and that's certainly going to have effect on coming generations. What just happened to us with the COVID shots is going to affect generations of humans.
Yeah, sure is.
Yeah, I will want to say that I have been teaching a course at IPAC EDU, and that's founded by James Lyonsweiler, who is very, very active in the medical freedom group and a friend of Bobby Kennedy and so forth. But I teach a course there called We Are Not Machines, or another one against transhumanism, response to transhumanism. And I will say that there, the idea that we can figure out, crack the code, here we are again talking about biological codes, crack the code and manipulate it and get humans to grow in a different way or be different or have a different way of thinking, or, the biological codes don't work like computer codes. There's not a one-to-one encryption. And if you change anything in a biological code, which usually you're talking about genetics, there will be side effects that you...
Yeah, it's a complex system.
It's a complex system. Yeah,
Yeah. Somebody else asked, this one's probably for me, what about nonverbal propaganda manipulation? Eric Trump hand signals, we need to pay attention to what's being said too. Yes, that's why the word logos winds up becoming really important, and understanding that that language is what we're talking about, and that words manifest themselves as the written symbols and the sounds that are coming out of my mouth. But if I do this is language too.
Yes.
And if I show you a picture, that's language too. And if you're listening to a song or watching a movie, that's language also, in the way that I'm using it. These are all different methods for imparting information from one being to the other. That's the logosphere, as it were.
You asked me something at the beginning of the hour about where I am now in the world, and I laughed a little bit because I am utterly despondent. I laughed nervously. Just, everything I said bad that was going to happen is now locking into place. I have been warning people about the, Chat GPT, not that it's intelligent and it's going to take over the world, but that they're convincing everyone that it is intelligent and capable of taking over the world. That's a very dangerous notion for people to have. I mean, it makes people say, oh, we should get AI to run the government. And now we have Palantir, which is about to do just that.
I think you're touching on something, and it's something that I've noticed in your work, and I wanted to talk to you about it. And so I got into this because I had a business partner for 4 years who it turned out was an asset in the international intelligence community, and let's call it supranational. And that's why the logo, the slug line up there says all news is made up, some of it is true. And that's because I worked with this guy on news outlets, and then we did crowdfunding sites, and some of the projects that we were doing were funded by Peter Thiel. And so I'm 1 degree away from a lot of stuff, and I got a chance to, but I didn't have a non-disclosure, because I was being used as an asset. I just happened to be a smart guy who was paying attention to what was going on. And I'm still friends with the guy. And he called me a couple of months ago, and he said, the one thing that I really don't understand is how people still believe that these perceived leaders have agency. That is, somebody like Peter Thiel or somebody like Donald Trump or somebody like Elon Musk aren't doing what they're told. Because if you understand that they're doing what they're told, then a lot of the whole Epstein thing.
Is anybody surprised? And I think what I've come to say more recently, but I've always said this, is that we need to stop trying to figure out what their next move is, and just figure out what our next move is.
100%.
Because, and I have been. I'm a farmer now. I've got sheep. I've got a garden, and so that's the first step. Following Voltaire's advice.
Well, but taking control of your own ability to react to things. I mean, that's why I took it back to the Sermon on the Mount. Is that I think that being meek means shut up and listen. Okay. I'm blanking on the 5 other ones. I've written articles about it. But the point is, all of them have to do with things that you can do for yourself. All of the interactions in this, except for the Sermon on the Mount, all of the interactions that Jesus has in the red letter parts of the Bible are all conversations. It's more Platonic than Aristotelian. That is, it's about how do you reframe your reality, or how do you help other people reframe their realities through the conversations that you're having with other people. So at that point, and Matthew 18:20 is where 2 or more are gathered, where 2 or more are gathered with the logos, okay, then that starts to make complete sense, because what he said, what Jesus also said was that if you get more than 11 people in the room, one of them is going to mess you up, so keep your conversation, keep it to the dinner table. You know what I mean? The dinner table winds up becoming the method, the mechanism by which we think our way out of this situation, as opposed to,
which is why we were forbidden to go to table, and
right.
we're online now, and because those personal conversations that kind of meander around a bit, those are ones in which you can discover new framings for things. And I think that that's what you're saying, is that our task is to frame things for ourselves and not be aware when we're being given the framing for every issue that comes up, and
right.
and make
and
sure
that's why the United States Army has given us a gift in neurolinguistic programming, because if we can use, because they developed it as a weapon, they clearly developed neurolinguistic programming as a weapon system. But the thing about it is that it's a 2,000-year-old universal. It's just a taxonomy that's been attached to a multi-millennia old mechanism of managing human belief systems. And if we can learn a few simple patterns and learn how to recognize those things, there's something that's incredible that happens. Now, you're a critical thinker, so you probably wouldn't notice this, okay? But one of the things that I noticed when I started to recognize and the easiest pattern to recognize is something called the universal quantifier, which is any, all, always, never, any word that takes the needle and moves it all the way over to one side or the other. If you learn how to recognize universal quantifiers, then you can start to learn how to recognize cause effects, and then you can start to learn how to recognize complex equivalencies. You don't have to do them all at the same time. Just learn how to recognize one at a time. All of a sudden, you have this world of questions, of interrogatives that flood into your consciousness that wind up spontaneously developing as, well, why does that happen? Or who said that? Or when did they say that happened? Or, all of these, they call them journalism questions, start flooding into your psyche.
I've often said that the difference, propaganda and art makes use of a lot of the same tools. For associating things, using metaphors, using analogies. The difference between them.
George Orwell said all art is propaganda.
The difference, since I am a defender of the arts, the difference is that propaganda hides its methods from you and tries to keep you from seeing the tools that are being used. And art calls attention to its devices and highlights the way it has just made your mind perceive something in a different way. You notice when you read something poetic, how your mind is working to come to that new image. If you're a good reader, I mean, you have to be, you have to like reading poetry, you have to be into it and so forth. But just in general, art should always do that, is to help you understand your own meaning-making process. Oh my God, I just put those two things together. That was odd. What is that? What am I saying with that? What does it say when you put those things together? Is that an artificial association, or is there some validity to comparing those two? So that's it. It's the same tools. And I'm afraid that a lot of people today don't study art, because the arts were killed. That's one of the first things that the CIA did, is they got rid of the artistic and creative types, the intelligentsia. They took over the universities and all the art institutions.
They built Andy Warhol.
They built Andy Warhol and Jack the Dripper. What was his Pollock? Jackson Pollock.
Yes, Jackson Pollock, and yeah,
it's a creation of the CIA for sure. There's a book about it. Yeah. So we don't really exercise our minds with art and learn how the brain makes meaning. So that's one, that's what art does. It helps you understand how you make meaning, and it makes you aware of your own meaning-making process and so forth. And that's critical thinking. If you want to get people to be more critical thinkers, maybe you can teach them some logic, but you could teach them to read poetry, do deep readings of poetry. That'll make them critical thinkers.
Yeah, my wife. I saw a movie the other day, The Man with No Face. It was probably made 30 years ago with Mel Gibson, and there's a scene in it where he's reading Shakespeare with the kid, and the kid is going, "But soft, what light on yonder window?" And Mel Gibson was going, "No, you got to read it like this."
Yeah.
So my wife and I were reading the Bible this morning, and I pulled the Bible out, and I thought, I'm doing this like Mel Gibson today.
Yeah.
It was much.
I was reading
more
some poetry this morning that I was reading it out loud, and I had been reading it silently, and I wasn't really getting into the book. But when I read it out loud, and I've become a good reader. I used to be a terrible reader. When I read it out loud, it had so much more meaning to it.
I didn't know what a dactyl was this morning, and now I know what. But I wanted to know, and so I spent a good 15 or 20 minutes getting my arms around what a dactyl is, and I thought it was like a paradiddle in drumming, but it's not. It's actually more like a triplet in drumming.
Yeah.
But
the word gallery is dactylic. Gallery.
Gallery.
One long, two short syllables.
But you could do it in phrases too, right?
Uh-huh.
Or is it just a word? It's a dactyl phrase, right? And anyway, the reason that I was excited to learn what a dactyl was this morning was because, again, it's pattern recognition. And if you think about poetry as like an FM radio signal, where you've got a carrier wave and then you've got the message that's on top of the wave, the pattern winds up becoming the wave, and then you've got a message on top of it. And I was thinking, the reason poetry, I think, developed as a medium is because it was a memory palace. It's a way to remember a lot of stuff.
That's an example I use all the time in so many of my scientific papers to defend the idea of biosemiotics. So stanza is a paragraph of a poem that means room, because poets used to remember lines of a poem by arbitrarily associating each line of the poem with an object in the palace. And so there you have the arbitrary association. This is part of biosemiotics of, why would that make your brain work better? Having an arbitrary association between things. And And let me give you an example. This is related to the Pavlovian conditioning. That's this type of Pavlovian conditioning there. We have one thing arbitrarily associated with another. My son and I listen to audiobooks when we're driving around all the time. And sometimes we lose our place, and maybe a day later or sometimes a week later, we have to search through the audiobook to find where we left off. And when we hear the words that we've heard before, we both can immediately picture where we were on the road when we heard that before. So the brain is able to make this arbitrary association between words that you're, in a Russian novel and the scene on the road. And so we don't remember things by repetition, rote memory, repeating things over and over. Maybe we can sometimes, but we have this superhuman capacity, it's almost miraculous capacity to associate two things arbitrarily just because they occurred at the same place at the same time. And there's so much that goes on in biology. I'm trying to get around the light. It's changing here.
Maybe the sun is telling us that.
It's getting late.
Now you look very Cecil B. DeMille.
In biological systems that these kinds of weird associations that are arbitrarily formed in biological systems, like words that you're listening to and the scene on the road. So there's a lot more to biology than we currently understand, and we should not go messing around with gene therapies or any pharmaceutical interventions, to be honest. Synthetic molecules that are byproducts of petroleum, really? Are you going to inject that in your body? Really? Do you think your body needs that? You think your body is deficient in a petroleum byproduct and you need that to function better? I don't think so.
Amen. Not only yes, but hell yes. Yeah. So disagreements usually wind up making more drama, but I'm glad that we've had this chance to have this conversation today, and I'd love to do it again. I'm fascinated by your work. I put a link on how people can find you below your smiling face there. So you can find Victoria N. Alexander at linktree/VN Alexander. We've been going for an hour and a half. If there's something more that you want to ask me to talk about, I'm in no hurry to jump off here. But I just want to be cognizant of time and see if you had any questions for me. Otherwise, we can wrap up and we can figure out if we want to do this again sometime.
I just wanted to say one thing about order out of chaos, because I work with a chaos theory. When I was at Rockefeller, Bellagio, the thing that I was working on was the mutability cantos that got left out of Spencer's Fairy Queen. And that's about the goddess mutability coming back in this raging, chaotic, she was so disturbing of the sensibilities of the royalty of Elizabeth's court and so forth. And the argument was, where does order come from? Does it come from these laws and the exact working out of the universe, or does it come from the mutability that allows for give and take and for a little bit of wiggle room? And when you have a little bit of wiggle room and things aren't completely determined and you can interpret things a little bit differently, then the order that emerges out of that is much more stable. It's a rigid system versus one that is a little bit chaotic but robust.
Right. Well, it's interesting because it makes me think of, you called your organization the third way. And if we understand that the ordo ab chao system of manipulating humanity is about creating false dialectics, it's always about the third way, because they've already planned the third way. So, I was thinking that there's more than three ways that you can do anything. There's I might call it the 361st way, because there's 360 degrees in a circle, and there's one more, you know. But the idea is that, you know, that premise is interesting. My comment back would be, is that the real problem, though? Or is the problem that when chaos is introduced deliberately by bad actors?
Yes, absolutely. But a little bit of chaos means that the individuals have freedom.
Well, life is normally chaotic, but when you add a 9/11 or a Palisades fire to it, it's like, that's not fun, you know. You know, that's not making the world a better place.
Yeah. I don't mean the same thing with chaos and destruction. I think, you know, when the bad people employ chaos, they're destroying things rather than building something out of all the unexpected correlations that arise when things are a little bit off kilter.
Let's talk about AI just a little bit before we leave, because I did something. So I have a guilty pleasure, and it drives my wife crazy. And people who follow me on the show know that it drives my wife crazy. But Google has this application that's an AI application called Notebook LM. Are you familiar with it?
Yeah.
And so a lot of times when I'm trying to understand things, I drop it in there, and then I have the two hosts, the two robots, have a little podcast where they talk about it. And so I've been dropping books. I've been dropping entire books into it, and it works great.
It sounds lifelike. It passes the Turing test 100%. I would just ask an author to respond to that, whether or not they're summarizing, because that's how I test.
I have.
And they'd say it's pretty good, or
my friend Nadav Eisenman, his father is the leading scholar in the world on the Dead Sea Scrolls, and wrote a book about James and the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I dropped it in there and I sent it to him, and he said, sounds pretty good. And anyway, I've got your doctoral dissertation. I can send it to you if you want to hear it.
Okay.
Anyway, it's creepy. It's creepy. I know that it's creepy, but I think that you're right, that the tendency for people. Here's the point that I wanted to make.
It's a tool that could have very interesting uses. And I have a Substack called The Posthumous Style that critiques AI from a biosemiotic point of view. That's on my link tree.
That's on your link tree. What I was going to say is that as far as AI is concerned, I think people like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and all the other people who are trying to warn us about the dangers of AI, this is all theater.
Absolutely, 100%.
This is all theater, and the AI ethics bill and all this other stuff. This is all about.
I've got an article coming up on AI ethics.
Yeah,
yes,
it's all about getting normies out there in the world, people who are not paying attention, to believe. I believe that you can create an AI bot that appears to most people to be sentient. Okay. But that doesn't mean it doesn't mean it's sentient, okay? But the threshold that they're trying to get to, which is a psychological threshold, it's not a technical threshold, okay, is to get people to believe that it's better than Gavin Newsom, or better than Karen Bass, or better than Donald Trump at doing something.
Such a low bar that people are going to say, yeah.
Well, that's why they're pushing the bar so low.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's what I've been writing about on the posthumous style is so.
And anyway, well, Victoria, it's been a pleasure. I'm so happy to have met you this way, and I'm so glad that all of there's 165 people watching live right now, so they can find you on the posthumous style on Substack, which is on your link tree, which is right below there, and they can get your book, which is called again
Well,
here we
yeah, go to my website, which is vianalexander.com, for a list of all of my books.
Okay.
I've got 5 novels, and I've got a new one coming out called The Girly Playhouse that is looking at feminine sexuality and contemporary life. So,
All right, I'm gonna.
that's coming out in April.
I must have missed. Here we go. Share this instead. Is that it? So there's your website. It's
Yep.
vianalexander.com.
Yeah.
And
Those are all
so
my
thanks.
books.
So thanks so much for joining us today, and we'll talk to you again.
It was
soon.
great getting to know you. I'm so glad that I was able to talk with you. I said, I have to talk to this guy.
Right. Well, I've gone down. I'm a autodidact polymath, and I've gone a completely different direction than you have. But I'm glad that we're both trying to solve the same problem.
Yeah.
So, anyway,
Thanks.
thanks.
You.
So I'm going to say
Bye.
goodbye. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks.
Bye.